Based on some preliminary numbers that we saw last week and a handful of other factors, it seems like participation in the CFA program might be down, and maybe down drastically. There are a handful of reasons that could be causing this, but I don't know for sure, and I'm sort of wondering if any of you might have some thoughts. Lower numbers could make sense given that we've seen decreased participation in college and university in general, and certainly in other postgraduate academic programs across the board. In this video, I'll explain why it looks like participation might be down, throw out a handful of ideas about potential reasons that could be causing it, and then also solicit thoughts from all of you about each of the ideas that I present, whether or not they might be accurate, and then try to get some additional ideas that maybe I haven't covered. Of all the potential reasons for this decline, I have one in mind that seems more likely than all others. I'm going to save that for the later parts of the video. Here's the thinking. For the August 2022 Level 1 CFA exam, only 19,000 candidates sat for that test. I mentioned it really quickly in my last video, and I said that it looked like participation was down, but still around 75% of where it normally is, but I was way off base there. In 2019, just before the pandemic, there were over 160,000 people who took the Level 1 exam. So to go from 160,000 to a potential annualized rate of 80,000, since there are 4 sittings now, means that unless these numbers change drastically in the next couple of sittings, participation may have been cut in half since 2019. And I've just noticed that in the videos I've posted about the recent pass rates and in Reddit threads concerning the topics, or just general activity of the online forums discussing the CFA exams, the program as a whole, it's kind of dead. Like, there are way less posts right now out there on the internet of people talking about the CFA exams, way less comments of how people performed, way less LinkedIn updates of recently passing or recently failing. I'm wondering where all the activity that seemed very commonplace a few years ago, where it went. Now, I've always gotten comments since having this YouTube channel that the CFA program's dead, it's not useful anymore, no one's gonna ever take it again. And I always just write those comments off as people being haters, maybe they failed an exam in the past and they don't like the program. But after seeing the decline in candidates and seeing the lack of activity online of people discussing these things, I'm wondering if those haters are starting to be proven right. Is participation decreasing drastically? Is the CFA program dead? For the purposes of this conversation, we're gonna assume that 19,000 candidate number will annualize to 80, meaning participation has been cut in half, and we need to talk about why that might be. Maybe this is a simple story about inflation and the rising value of the US dollar relative to every other currency on the planet right now. Both of those factors making the exams less affordable and more difficult to approach. If you're watching this channel, you probably have some level of knowledge about financial markets, so I'm not going to go into the economics of inflation or currency exchange rates and how those could impact people's abilities to pay for the exams, but this is a potential factor, so it's worth mentioning. Now, my feeling is that if that were the driving factor, we would see a decrease in participation rates about commensurate to the amount of increase that the price of taking the exams has had relative to local currencies. So if the US dollar is up 20% relative to some country's currency, maybe participation would be down 20%, not 100%. I mean, this is a huge change, assuming, again, that the participation rate annualizes. Could it be the war in Europe and logistical difficulties for people, especially in Eastern Europe, getting to the exam centers to take what they would otherwise wanted to have taken in a CFA test? Maybe that is a potential factor. Millions of people's lives have been upended since that whole war started. I'm certain that there's a non-zero quantity of people who would have taken a CFA exam but have not taken that exam yet because of their living situation given that war. But again, the decrease in candidates just seems too significant. It's not like 50% of CFA candidates live in Eastern Europe. So I don't think that war could be the whole story. Now, could it be something specific to the CFA Institute or the CFA program that is discouraging candidates from participating? Is it the image that the Institute puts out there? Is it the lack of marketing that they do to the public? Could it be that potential candidates are discouraged by the low pass rates that we saw throughout 2021 and thinking that there's no way that they could become a charter holder, so they're just not going to try? In my mind, those potential factors seem more likely. But I also don't think that those factors are all that much different today than they were 3 years ago when we saw record enrollments, right? The CFA program never marketed itself that much globally. If anything, I think they're a little bit more active online than they were 3, 5, 10 years ago. The image, while it probably hasn't improved over the last few years, it's not like it's way down. They are charging a lot for random educational online programs now, but there wasn't any type of major controversy that could have knocked participation rate, so I'm not positive that it's an image issue. Finally, what I teed up earlier as the most likely potential reason that enrollment could be way down is what I would call a generational thing. Could it be that Gen Z, the current generation of 20 to 25-year-olds, no longer values the CFA program or institutional education in general? And the reason I mention the latter is because even enrollment in major universities and colleges is way down. This is getting talked about a lot behind the scenes right now. The numbers we've seen for college and university enrollment are not down nearly as much as what I'm assuming the potential decrease in CFA participation may be. But if it really is a generational thing, meaning the Gen Z people just don't value what these programs are offering, then we would see a similar pattern of declining participation across various academic programs. So the fact that university enrollment is down, the fact that the CPA has said that less people are becoming certified public accountants here in the US, I would imagine that trend is also true in India with the CA program. That is why I think it might just be that Gen Z doesn't value this stuff anymore. And if that's right, that could be a significant issue for human beings in the next 20, 30 years. Of course, not every person needs to go to college or pursue some postgraduate degree or any type of professional education for that matter, but when you have a global society where a certain proportion of people are pursuing designations like that, and those people filter into the professional roles within that society. Of course, if participation in the education needed for those professional roles decreased significantly, maybe even by like 50%, then obviously we would have a lot of holes in the job market and in the economy as a whole. But maybe more importantly, we would have drastically fewer very educated people and drastically more undereducated people relative to what our population has had over the last half a century. And I can only imagine what types of ideas you or other people may come up with about the fallout that could happen from having a much lesser educated future population. I don't even have any top of mind right now, but I could sit down with some buddies for a couple of hours and I'm sure we'd be able to spitball some interesting scenarios when people stop educating themselves after middle school or high school or something like that. But the counter to that thinking would be that people who take the CFA exams are usually the more motivated members of society. So even if a big chunk of the population said, no, I don't need secondary education anymore, hopefully the portion of the population that's always going to be very motivated would stay very motivated and still sit for a CFA exam, for example. The reason I just presented may not be a great case for a decrease in very professional designations that only the most motivated people would have applied for anyway. So even though I think this generational thing is the most likely answer, I'm not saying that I'm sure of that, and I wonder what all of you think. Anyway, we will see exactly what the annualized participation rate is going to be after the next 2 sittings of the level 1 exam, so I might be more curious to look at those numbers even more so than the pass rate or the minimum passing score estimates. I'm going to want to see if demand for the CFA has really fallen off a cliff. So thank you for hearing me out. As I've asked for a handful of times, let me know down below what you think. Like this video, share it so more others can add their input. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. I very much appreciate it. Have a good one.